Afghanistan. The land history calls the graveyard of empires, from the mighty armies of Alexander the Great to the legions of Genghis Khan, from the British Empire to the Soviets in the 1980s. All came with steel, fire, and power, all left in defeat. But among the Pashtun tribes of the south, whispers tell a different story. They say Alexander did not just fight warriors of flesh and blood. He faced something far older, far larger. Giants, towering beings who ruled the deserts and caves of Kandahar long before a single banner was raised. Legends say these giants stood shoulder to shoulder with the mountains themselves. Armed with weapons carved from stone, their shadows stretching across valleys. When Alexander's men marched east, it wasn't just tribes they clashed with. It was these colossal guardians of the land. Most dismiss these tales as folklore, bedtime warnings mothers told their children. Yet, in Afghanistan, myths and reality often blur, and some legends refuse to die. Because centuries later, in the early 2000s, U.S. soldiers deployed to southern Afghanistan began whispering their own stories. Tales of patrols that vanished, caves that swallowed men whole, and encounters with something not human. So the question lingers: were the Giants of Kandahar only myths? Or did one of history's oldest legends awaken during America's war on terror? September 11th, 2001. A date that changed the world forever. Within weeks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom. The mission was clear: dismantle Al-Qaeda, topple the Taliban regime that sheltered them. Kandahar, in southern Afghanistan, quickly became the focus. Remote, jagged, unforgiving. A land of endless ridges and caverns carved into the Spingar Mountains. To locals, these caves had stood for thousands of years. To insurgents, they were the perfect fortress. And for American soldiers, they were death traps. Green Berets, Navy SEALs, and Delta Force operators were tasked with the most dreaded duty: cave clearing. Crawling into black tunnels where every shadow could hide an ambush, where every step might trigger a tripwire. Soldiers nicknamed them rat nests, spider holes. Inside, oxygen was thin. Darkness pressed in like a physical weight. One veteran later said, "You don't feel like the hunter in those caves. You feel like the hunted." It was here, in these caverns of Kandahar, where myth and modern warfare would collide. And it began with a patrol that never returned. Spring 2002, Kandahar Province. A special forces squad moves into the mountains on a routine mission. Experienced men, well-armed, well-trained. And then, silence. No radio, no distress call, no last coordinates. They simply vanish. Command authorizes a quick reaction force, a QRF, another elite team, dropped in to locate the missing squad. Standard procedure. But what they found was anything but standard. Scattered along a ridge were fragments of gear, a torn rucksack, ammunition clips, even a satellite radio, broken, its casing cracked, all U.S. issue. But there were no bodies, no drag marks, no blood. The trail led downward into a valley carved by centuries of wind and dust. And at its end, the gaping mouth of a cave. The soldiers paused, perimeter secured, weapons raised, Overwatch scanning the ridgelines. And then, silence. Eerie, unnatural silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. One operator later recalled, "It was too quiet. No birds, no insects, nothing alive." The cave stood before them, black, wide, and waiting. They had expected an ambush, They were prepared for Taliban fighters. But what awaited inside was something far stranger. Cave clearing had a rhythm. Perimeter first, overwatch on the high ground, entry team stacked at the mouth. Flashbangs if needed, rifles locked forward, move slow, move steady. That was the plan. But plans don't survive contact. The silence inside the cave broke like glass. Out of the blackness, something moved. Something massive. At first, just a shadow stretching across the stone. Then, red hair, a mane of it, a beard that seemed to burn against the darkness. It stepped into the light. 12, maybe 15 feet tall. Shoulders broad as a doorway, hands enormous, 6 fingers on each. And in one hand, clutched like a toy, a weapon, long, spear-like, shaped for killing, then it charged. The speed was impossible. One moment, it was in the cave. The next, it was upon them. A soldier named Dan barely had time to raise his weapon. The spear struck, through him, lifted him clean off his feet. The squad erupted. Training took over. M4 carbines thundered, muzzles flashing in the gloom. Squad automatic weapon opened up. 30 seconds of sustained fire. Controlled bursts, face, chest, head. And only then did the giant finally fall. The battlefield went silent again.
Jesus Christ, what the hell was that thing? That's no man, Sarge. Look at its hands. 6 damn fingers.
Shit, man. It skewered him like he was nothing.
Command, sit rep. Target is down. Repeat, target is down. But it's not human. I say again, not human.
For a moment, no one spoke. Just the sound of boots shifting on gravel. Heavy breathing inside helmets. Finally, one operator muttered under his breath. Words half prayer, half warning. If that was in one cave, God help us if there are more. The cave mouth loomed behind them, and in the dust, the giant's body sprawled. Massive, real, undeniable. The giant lay still. The firefight was over, but the sight before the soldiers was worse than the battle itself. Red hair matted with blood. Skin pale, stretched over muscle and bone, thick as timber. The face, grotesque yet human. A mouth lined with 2 rows of teeth. Jagged, predatory. The body was immense, over 12 feet from head to boot. Easily 1,000 pounds, maybe more. It took every man just to shift it onto a net. Then came the sound of rotors. A CH-47 Chinook thundered overhead, lowering into the valley. But the men who stepped out were different. No insignias, no name tags, sterile uniforms. Their expressions flat, unreadable. They gave no explanations, only orders. The body was wrapped, bound in cargo netting, and hauled into the belly of the Chinook. Within minutes, it was gone. Where? No one knew. Some whispered Germany's Ramstein Air Base. Others claimed Wright-Patterson in the United States. Back at base, the team expected debriefs. Instead, they were met with silence, forced to sign non-disclosure agreements, ordered in plain words, this mission never happened. And yet, every man who stood in that cave knew exactly what they had seen. They called it an open secret. Among operators, rumors spread fast. The mission was never written in logs, but the whispers carried from fire base to fire base. The story of a red-haired giant cut down in Kandahar. By 2008, the legend broke beyond the wire. A U.S. pilot went on coast-to-coast AM, claiming he had helped transport the corpse. He described the smell, the weight, the tarp that barely covered its frame. Years later, in 2016, another voice emerged. A man known only as Mr. K. In a rare interview, he repeated the same details. 12 to 15 feet tall, flaming red hair, 6 fingers, a spear that skewered one of his men. 2 rows of teeth, the same image, again and again. But officially, nothing. Freedom of Information Act requests, denied. Army casualty records for 2002 show no soldier named Dan killed under such circumstances. No missing squad, no cave firefight. The silence only deepened the suspicion, because if nothing happened, why erase it so completely? For the men who carried the memory, there was no doubt. They hadn't fought myth. They had fought something real, something ancient. Years passed, but the whispers didn't fade. Kandahar province, northeastern Afghanistan, dense forests, jagged ridges, valleys so deep that even satellites struggled to map them. A U.S. infantry team was deployed there, this time with new gear, thermal optics, capable of cutting through night like daylight. One soldier, scanning the ridgeline, froze. His display lit up with a heat signature. Not a man, not an animal, but something towering. 12, maybe 15 feet tall, as tall as the surrounding pine trees. He watched in silence. The figure moved, effortless, striding across the mountainside as if the terrain meant nothing. Then, gone, vanished into the black. When the team asked locals, the replies were strange. They spoke of giants who roamed the high ridges. And curiously, many dyed their goat's hair bright orange. Some even streaked their own hair the same way. Why? Some said it was an offering, a sign of respect or fear of the red-haired ones who still walked those mountains. Not all sightings came from boots on the ground. A U.S. Air Force drone operator, stationed thousands of miles away, monitored a feed from a remote Afghan valley. At first, everything looked ordinary. Villagers tending fires, goats grazing near stone huts. Then his screen caught movement. Figures, too large to be men. 3, maybe 4 meters tall. Humanoid, broad-shouldered, moving among the villagers as if they belonged. He blinked, thinking it was an optical error. But no, the heat signatures held steady, their size unmistakable. One bent to stoke a fire, another herded goats. Yet the goats looked tiny beside them, like cats, not livestock. The operator noted, no hostility, no aggression, just living, side by side with ordinary humans. He reported it up the chain, but the reply came back cold, clinical. No further action, log and move on. For him, the message was clear. In those remote places, hidden from the world's eye, some giants weren't just legends, they were neighbors. Long before America's war on terror, the people of Afghanistan already told stories. Stories of giants. In Pashtun folklore, the caves and deserts of Kandahar were not empty wastelands. They were dwelling places of ancient warriors, titans who once ruled these valleys. Mothers warned their children not to wander at night, lest the long ones take them. Legends even say that when Alexander the Great marched into these lands, he did not only face tribesmen, he faced giants, towering figures who struck terror into his armies. And though he conquered kingdoms far and wide, Afghanistan became the place he could not tame. The parallels run deeper. The Bible speaks of the Nephilim, of the Rephaim, of King Og of Bashan, a ruler described as massive beyond measure. And of course, Goliath, the giant felled by David. The traits repeat across time. Towering height, red hair, 6 fingers, 2 rows of teeth. Modern believers connect the dots. To them, the Kandahar Giant wasn't just a freak encounter in 2002. It was a glimpse into a story that began thousands of years ago. A story of beings who who were never fully erased. But not everyone believes. Fact-checkers like Snopes and skeptics at Metabunk dismiss the story as myth. They argue there are no bodies, no photographs, no verifiable names, only testimony. The most famous evidence, a photo of U.S. soldiers posing with a giant corpse, was exposed as a hoax, lifted straight from the 2007 film Pathfinder and doctored to fit the tale. And yet, the silence from the military remains strange. There has been no official denial, no press release calling it fantasy. Only the cold repeating phrase, "No records found." To skeptics, that means nothing happened, nothing to deny. To believers, it means cover-up, proof that the truth is too explosive to admit. And so the story lingers in the shadows, neither confirmed nor erased. Afghanistan has always been called the land of the unconquered. Empires have bled into its soil and left broken. But in 2002, did U.S. soldiers face not just insurgents, but something ancient? Something left behind from a forgotten war between men and giants. If nothing happened, why the enforced silence? Why the NDAs, the missing reports, the erased logs? Perhaps that is why this story refuses to die. It is not just a tale of battle. It is a blend of warfare and folklore, of scripture and mystery. And for every skeptic who laughs it away, another soldier whispers that it was real. The final question echoes still. What did those men see in that cave? And why does no one in power want to talk about it? The legend of Kandahar leaves us with a chilling thought that Afghanistan's mountains may hide more than insurgents. But Kandahar wasn't the only battlefield where myth and war seemed to blur. Just months earlier, the world's eyes turned to the White Mountains, to the caves of Tora Bora, where the hunt for Osama bin Laden began. And there, amid bombs shaking the earth and caverns echoing with silence, American soldiers whispered of things they could never explain. Afghanistan, the land no empire has ever truly conquered, a land where history and legend walk side by side. December 2001, just weeks after the September 11th attacks. Intelligence was clear. Osama bin Laden, the mastermind of 9/11, was here, hiding in the cave networks of Tora Bora, a fortress of stone buried deep in the White Mountains. The mission was urgent. The United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom, sending CIA paramilitary units, Green Berets, Delta Force, and allied Afghan militias into the frozen ridges. Overhead, B-52 bombers dropped their payloads, shaking the mountains to their core. Every tunnel, every crevice, every cave was a possible hiding place for the world's most wanted man. But soldiers on the ground quickly learned something chilling. Tora Bora was not just rock and ice. The mountains had a voice of their own, whispers in the darkness, shadows that moved when no one was there. For some, it was stress, exhaustion. For others, it was something far older, something that didn't fear bullets or bombs. Because in Tora Bora, U.S. soldiers would discover they were not only hunting Al-Qaeda, they were stepping into a labyrinth that locals believed was haunted by giants and spirits that never left. After September 11th, 2001, America struck back. Operation Enduring Freedom was launched. The mission: destroy Al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban, and capture Osama bin Laden. By late November, intelligence was clear. Bin Laden was hiding in the cave fortress of Tora Bora. Between November 30th and December 17th, U.S. warplanes pounded the White Mountains. B-52s dropped massive payloads, shaking ridges that had stood for centuries. Precision-guided bombs sealed cave entrances in fire and dust. On the ground, it was chaos. U.S. Special Forces, CIA paramilitary units, British and German SOF, Afghan militias under Hazrat Ali and Mohammed Zaman, all converged on the caves. Delta Force teams slipped into the mountains, blending with Afghan fighters. They directed airstrikes, fought skirmishes in frozen gullies, and advanced ridge by ridge. At the height of the battle, CIA Commander Gary Burnson begged for reinforcements. He wanted 800 U.S. Army Rangers to block the passes into Pakistan, to trap bin Laden inside. The request was denied by General Tommy Franks. When the dust settled on December 17th, the caves were in ruins. Al-Qaeda was scattered. But bin Laden, he was gone, escaped into Pakistan, a ghost slipping through America's grasp. Tora Bora was not just mountains, it was a labyrinth. During the Soviet War of the 1980s, the caves had been expanded, fortified into a network of tunnels and chambers, some wide enough for trucks, others so narrow a man had to crawl on his belly. Inside, it was suffocating. Poor ventilation, thin air, freezing cold, and total darkness. For U.S. Special Operations Forces, Green Berets, Delta, and CIA teams, this was home for weeks. They dug into shallow caves, carved dugouts into ice, slept on bare rock. Patrols rotated in 2- and 3-man teams. Men lay hidden for hours, motionless, eyes fixed on cave mouths. Listening, waiting. There were rules. No fires, no light, no sound, not even the crackle of a radio unless absolutely necessary. At night, the mountains were dead silent. Soldiers slept in their bags, breath clouding in the air, rifles clutched close. One Green Beret later said, "It wasn't just the enemy we feared. It was the silence, the way it seemed alive." And in that silence, strange things began to happen. It began with whispers. At night, soldiers swore they heard voices. Not English, not Pashto, not Arabic. Strange words echoing faintly through the tunnels. Sometimes the whispers came with a rush of air, as if something massive had just passed through unseen corridors. Other times, droplets of water fell from ceilings that moments before had been bone dry. And then, there were the shadows. On night watch, men spotted silhouettes moving across the ridgelines. Towering shapes, broader, taller than any man. Their outlines stretched against the moonlight, then melted into fog. Command chalked it up to stress, to exhaustion, to the tricks of acoustics in a cave system where even a footstep could echo like thunder. But the reports kept coming. Too many, from too many teams, in too many places. One Green Beret said later, "You tell yourself it's just the caves, just nerves. But when half your team sees the same thing, you stop laughing it off." And then came the incident, the one that no one could explain away. A 3-man Delta patrol was sent deep into one of the caves. Standard sweep, slow, careful. At first, nothing. Then, water hitting stone, echoing all around them. But when they raised their lights, there was nothing. No cracks, no water, just dry rock. Minutes later, the sound changed, a low grind, like stone sliding over stone, heavy, massive, as if a boulder was being rolled deeper inside the tunnel. The patrol froze, rifles up, every man scanning. Nothing moved. The tunnel was empty. And then they heard it. A voice. No, not one. Several, whispering, low, harsh, in a language they couldn't place. Not Pashto, not Arabic, not anything they knew. The team leader keyed his comms. Possible contact, requesting backup. But nothing emerged. No fighters, no ambush. Only the whispers, the sound of rocks shifting. One operator later said, "It felt like something was in there with us, watching, hurting us. But when we pushed deeper, there was nothing. Just black walls, just silence." The patrol pulled back. But none of them forgot that night. For in Tora Bora, even the stones seemed alive. That same shift. The team pushed deeper into the tunnel. Night vision goggles cut through the black. At first, only rock, dust, empty passage. Then, something moved. Through the green haze of NVGs, an outline appeared, enormous. A silhouette nearly touching the cave's ceiling, shoulders wider than any man could carry. The figure stepped forward, each movement heavy, deliberate. The crunch of stone underfoot. The team froze, weapons up, hearts pounding. The shape turned slightly, then melted back into darkness. Gone. For a few long seconds, silence, only their breathing. And then came the whispers, quick, nervous. The men advanced, slow, careful, rifles locked into the black. But the figure never returned. Later, one of them swore. It wasn't a shadow. Shadows don't breathe. Whatever that was, it was alive. Hours later, the same team regrouped in a shallow cave. Exhausted, weapons propped against the wall. The air was still, cold, silent. Then, drip. A drop of water struck one man's sleeve, another on his helmet, then another. They raised their lights. The ceiling was bare, dry stone, no cracks, no condensation, nothing. And yet the dripping continued. Moments later, the sound returned, the grinding of rock, louder this time, closer, like a massive weight shifting just beyond the tunnel wall. The soldiers sat frozen, listening, hands tightening around their rifles. One whispered later. It felt like the cave itself was moving, breathing, like something was just behind the stone. The noise went on for minutes, then stopped, leaving only silence and the knowledge that something unseen had been there with them. Minutes stretched like hours, and then it came. A shadow, massive, shifting at the edge of their vision. The ground trembled. Each step sent faint vibrations through the stone floor. Boots rattled against loose pebbles. "Hold position," the team leader hissed. Weapons rose, fingers tight on triggers. Through their NVGs, the image danced with static. The green glow flickered, cutting in and out. Shadows bled across the walls, distorted, stretched. The giant form moved closer, closer. The air grew heavy. Their chests tightened with every breath. Then, suddenly, it turned. The massive shape pivoted and slipped deeper into the cave. The soldiers exchanged quick glances. No words, just the silent understanding, follow. They pushed forward cautiously, rifles sweeping every angle. That's when the air changed. The temperature plunged. Frost hung in their breath, steam curling in the beams of their flashlights. Their sensors spiked. NVGs glitched again. Thermals lit up, like tracking a furnace buried in human shape. One operator whispered later. It was like chasing a heat source wrapped in ice. Alive, intelligent, waiting for us. And still, the figure led them deeper. Then, it struck. Out of nowhere, a gust of wind ripped through the tunnel. Not a breeze, a force. Dust and sand exploded into the air, blinding them. Eyes burned, lungs filled with grit. The soldiers dropped low, coughing, trying to hold formation. NVGs scrambled, white static, black blur, green streaks. Nothing clear. And over it all, movement. Heavy steps circling them in the storm, a presence pressing close. One soldier swore later he felt the vibration of a massive chest, breathing just feet away. Then, silence. As quickly as it began, the storm died. The dust settled. The tunnel cleared. Their lights cut across empty stone. No figure, no tracks. Nothing. Only the echo of their own breathing. When they returned to base and reported, command dismissed it. Stress, acoustics, fog of war. But every man in that patrol knew different. They hadn't imagined it. They had felt it, seen it, heard it. And deep in Tora Bora, something enormous had walked beside them. Among Afghan fighters, the warnings were old as the mountains themselves. These caves, these deserts, they belonged to the Giants. They fought Alexander's army long ago and they never left. Pashtun mothers whispered the same warnings to their children at night. Behave, or the giant will come for you. To the locals, giants were guardians, keepers of hidden caves, treasures, and the deep silence of the White Mountains. At first, American soldiers brushed it off. Folklore, just campfire stories. But after weeks in the cold dark, whispers began to echo in their own ranks. A night watchman would mutter, "Saw something move, taller than the ridgeline." Another swore he heard rocks shifting under footsteps, too heavy to be human. And slowly, the myths of Afghanistan became warnings shared not by villagers, but by soldiers in camouflage, clutching rifles, afraid of the dark. Official history remembers Tora Bora for one thing. It was the battle where Osama bin Laden slipped away. But the men who stood guard in those freezing caves remember something else. Shadows too large, voices in no language they knew, the steady thud of footsteps in empty tunnels. And when their stories leaked, quietly, cautiously, they sounded hauntingly familiar. Kandahar, Kunar, Tora Bora, different battles, different valleys, but the same legend. Giants walking Afghanistan's mountains. Were they illusions, fog, the stress of war? Or had America's most elite soldiers stumbled into something ancient, something locals had always warned about? Perhaps they weren't just hunting Al-Qaeda in those caves. Perhaps in the smoke and dust of modern war, they had disturbed something far older, something Afghanistan had never forgotten. The giants of its mountains. Thank you for listening. You've probably heard many versions of this story before, but how did this one strike you? Do you think these are just myths born from the fog of war? Or echoes of something far more ancient? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the legends of Afghanistan's mountains, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell, so you won't miss the next story where history and mystery collide. Until next time, stay curious and stay watchful.